Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery and there's a couple bins I wanted to check in on today. And those are where I keep my mixed population of worms. Most bins have just a single type of worm occupying it, but I've also got over here in this VermiBag tote, if you look closely you can see that it's actually a bag suspended within the box, which is a little different from all my other systems. That's where I've got my population of mixed worms. It's blue worms, European night crawlers, and red wigglers, and when I moved them into that new bin 34 days ago, I had also held on to their castings and I started what I call a cocoon nursery over here, assuming that their castings were still loaded with a bunch of cocoons that had yet to hatch. So it's been 10 days now since we applied food into the worm bin and we just sort of checked in on the cocoon nursery bin. And I think that we're probably due for feeding. So I'm going to get these bins up onto the bench, put on a glove, and we'll get to work. I'm starting down here in the cocoon nursery. After I got done last week, I think some of the comments in the video for the check-in, even last week, 10 days ago, the check-in 10 days ago, to me, appeared as if everything in here was okay, as if the moisture levels were fine, but I'm pretty sure some of the feedback I got was that it could be much more damp, and that cocoons emerging, or baby worms emerging from their cocoons, better said, is pretty dependent on a pretty high level of moisture in the system. So I'm thinking, even if I go in here and feel like the system's got sufficient moisture, I'm going to go ahead and dampen it down anyway, because then what do you got to lose? Maybe it'll help, Hopefully it does. I think it will if I do. And it's not if I do. I believe I am going to do it right now. Let me get my bottle. The bottle's full, ready to go. So it's not even a decision of making an evaluation and deciding. It's just doing it at this point. So it is a good chance to look through all the material too, while pushing a little bit of it aside and dampening each exposed bit. Well, I'm approaching the point where this bottle is empty. Sometimes when I tip it a little bit already, it starts to make that cavitating noise. Yeah, why don't we leave it at that? Seems like a nice dampening. Certainly can't hurt. I saw worms. Some were pretty small, but still, they didn't seem small enough, to me at least, to look like they would have been born in here. They seem like ones that might have just sort of snuck by the process when I was collecting up the inhabitants of this material and getting them into their new location. They were just kind of asleep at the wheel. When everyone else knew what to do, everyone else got up and went over to the other end of the bin where all the food and everything else was. Some of these little guys just sort of missed the boat. So I'm just kind of covering things back up here, hopefully adequately, with this plastic coverage to help keep things nice and damp underneath the plastic. It has room enough for a little bit of airflow, but here, airflow I don't think is as important as maybe retention of the moisture. So let's set this aside, and what we've got right below is the system where the adult worms live. I'll lower the camera just a tad so we can get a closer view of what's happening here. Now on the menu for today, coffee, kitchen scraps, blah, 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 blah. Pumpkin stem. It's pretty much a big stick, I mean, you can't expect much to happen with this, but it does have a huge chunk of actual meaty pumpkin attached to it. So I'm going to use this as a part of our feeding today, along with the cucumber and the Brussels sprout leaves. And we'll leave it in here as long as it takes for them to clean that thing off. And when it's down to only a stick, I suppose we could leave it or take it out. We'll probably take it out, but it's just going to be kind of a novelty feeding item to include with today's feeding. As far as what to include with today's feeding too, I was thinking about the bedding, and after reviewing the video from the last check-in, it did seem like there were a couple pieces of paper in here that could be used or reused in a different way to serve as our bedding to go hand in hand with today's feeding. And I think that those are those items that you see right down here. These 2 chunks of cardboard and this 1 piece of paper. And then we probably won't have to break out my supply of pre-made bedding. It's not to say that we can't break it out. If we feel we need it, we've got it right here behind me on the shelf. It's ready to go if I need some. But I'm thinking that these 2 pieces of cardboard here and the coffee filter, they should all serve as a pretty good amount of bedding for our feeding today. This stuff goes back to when I migrated the worms out of their previous bin. I used these as little dividing walls between the finished compost and the area that I was trying to lure the worms to. Kind of little dividing walls. This is meant to show us where we fed. But we'll use it as bedding, and we'll use the filter that comes in with today's feeding, the fresh one. So this semi-aged paper here will go in as bedding, and it'll hopefully double as a food product for these little guys as well. So I think one of our main concerns last week was this dryness that we're going to observe out on the sides, which is almost inevitable if you're covering with a sheet of plastic. There's no way to seal the edges. There's always going to be a little bit of airflow around the edges permitting drying. But it seems nowhere near as severe as we saw previously. And over here even on the edges, it seems like there's no drying at all even. So we're much better protected from the drying effects of insufficient coverings here now, I think. And we probably don't have to worry too much about it. I think it's acceptable to find a little bit of dry stuff on one side like over here, and a little bit of dry stuff on this other side like over here. But for the most part, if we're thorough in the covering of this system with our plastic at the end, I think we can manage it without having to go crazy trying to supplement the lost moisture that evaporates out of the system. So before we dump in today's feeding, I guess we can take a little tour. Just want to check the outsides, the outer edges of the bin, the sections of the bin furthest away from the feeding. Oh, there I go. Mistakenly remembering how I fed this system last time. I thought that I watched the video and I thought that I had fed in the pocket in this system, in the corner. But now that I go back, before I picked this thing up, it was resting right across the middle, indicating to us that that's where we had last fed. So it's another bin of mine where I fed in the corner where the pocket feedings are going on. So scrap that. If we want to check in on today's feeding, it is down the middle. But we'll save that for the end. I just wanted to quickly inspect the outer edges of the system. So I don't know what got me confused on that. No big deal. Maybe it's just because it's been a while since that system got fed, and it's probably due, so it'll probably be checked in on in the next day or two. And then we'll have to get into the pocket feeding check-in. But for now, I don't think that's what we've got going on here. I think we've just got feedings down the middle. It's probably where we'll find a good amount of worms, but I just want to also verify that things on this other edge are okay too. You know, right away I could see, you could see them too. They're worms hanging out right there on the very edge, furthest away from where the feedings would have been applied. And they seem quite content here, nothing to worry about. Pretty dry stuff right next to them. And this is our chance to sort of mix that in with some more damp stuff that's right nearby. And like I said before, we can just try to take greater care in the covering up of the system at the end to try to make sure the system doesn't just give up its moisture. It's allowed to give up a little bit, I think. It's almost inevitable in most systems, but if you're not covering up with a rigid lid, then you need to somehow guard against undo drying, excess evaporation. Alright, so down here we could even see some bedding that looks kind of fresh, even almost, as if it hasn't even soaked any moisture into itself yet, with that really bright color. So hopefully this feeding we're giving them today is going to kick off a good amount of moisture. I am tempted to run upstairs though and swap this piece of pumpkin out for just another more generic piece for this feeding and save this now for the pocket feeding, this stem. It seems like it would have been a novel thing to do in the pocket feeding bin. You know what? I will do just that. Give me 5, I'll be right back. Ta-da! Just like that, no more stem. Alright, so as promised, we're going to finally put some of this paper and cardboard to better use by actually getting it down into the feeding area, subject it to a little bit more activity. And let's see, a little variety, a little this, little that. Sprinkle on a little bit of coffee. Spread it around. I've even got pulverized eggshell to combine with the food too. Give them some grit supplement. Okay, looking good, looking good. Another good size piece of pumpkin. Ooh, these cucumber peels I think are going to be a hit. The Brussels sprout leaves are usually pretty popular item too. Any sort of leaves, especially if they've been frozen and thawed, the way they pretty much dissolve on their own makes them fair game for pretty quick consumption in the worm bin in most cases. I don't know, should I be really generous with the grit? Give them a little bit more even right there. Why not, right? And then all this paper here, you know, it's not just one sheet of paper. When you look at a piece of cardboard, there's probably 3 sheets in here, right? There's the wavy piece in between the 2 flat pieces. So we've really got a good amount of paper here. Compliments of these old dividing walls. But I think now that we're pretty far along and haven't gotten our use out of them, or our money's worth, they don't owe us anything. We can give them a more honorable end here in the worm bin and let them turn into worm food. I think that being down in the feeding area like this is what gives them the best chance of having that happen. And I don't think we've got anything else, right? That's pretty much it for today's feeding. We'll use this coffee filter to mark where we last fed, but we'll try to submerge everything that made up our feeding so that it can be approached from all angles, even from above. Passerby worm could be just cruising along on the surface here and sense that there's something going on right beneath his feet. Dive down and well, he'll dive down and he'll hit those cardboard barriers, but luckily they're full of little tiny holes, so it won't serve as an obstacle. The little guy should be able to make its way right down into those yummy cucumber shavings and Brussels sprout leaves and pumpkin bits. Now I've got a couple little hitchhikers over here on this plastic. I was thinking that maybe, since we've got that pretty good size plastic covering, that red plastic bag, maybe we don't need these bubble wrap bits, but you know what the heck, let's keep them going with the bubble wrap, and then it'll be sort of a complement to each other. And hopefully I can get this thing down and cover things up well enough that it really limits the amount of airflow that gets around it. I mean, I could see little gaps here and there around the edges, so it's not perfect by any means, but it doesn't really have to be. I think what we've got going on here is pretty good. It's doing a nice job. So not much left to do here other than get stuff cleaned up and put away, but I'm not going to waste your time with that because that's boring. Before I go though, let me just really quickly say thank you. Thanks so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, as always, please remember to leave me a thumbs up. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel too. That's really appreciated as well. All right, everyone. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.